Welcome to the TrustBuilder Podcast, where we explore some of the most difficult questions when it comes to trust. Today, we have Brad Williams with us as well as John Schwab from Schwab Law. Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, we've done some work together from time to time, and we just really wanted to hear John's perspective as we think about trust. John is a criminal lawyer. Not either one of our criminal
No,
lawyers, but
he hasn't done work for
he has
us.
this yet.
Yet.
Knock on
wood.
knock on wood.
Yeah.
But we just wanted to hear his thoughts on trust, and particularly with the question that we're asking today, which I think is so pertinent to law, which is, can you trust someone you compete with? Oh my gosh.
Good question.
And so the two questions, so Brad had a question that he brought for me, and I have one for him. And so I'm going to start by asking Brad the question, and then we're gonna go from there. And John, we're gonna chime in, and we're just gonna kind of riff on this question: is it naive or strategic to build trust with a competitor? Ooh, competition.
This one hurts. Because, I don't know. We don't talk a lot about our own trust profiles a lot. I tend to be very trusting as a person. Like that's probably to a fault. I tend to trust. But it is interesting. I mean, I'm in an industry where it's pretty competitive from a sales standpoint, and I have been instructed to trust certain partners, certain people that we compete against. So we have some competitors that we choose to trust a little more and consider them partners. So I think this is an interesting thing because I find myself in this tension all the time. There's a couple in particular where I find myself kind of wrestling with, should I be trusting these people? Like I know that other people have told me trust them. But there's been this thing inside of me that says, I don't trust. If you're my competitor, you're always looking for a way to undermine me. So this one's a real tension for me. In fact, maybe we should just let John answer this because I don't think I have the answer. Because just today, I found out that a competitor that I split business with was undermining us on something. So the customer actually called and revealed to me that this person was undermining.
And that hurts too, because there's a broken trust there. Like, so how do you not react to that?
Yeah, and it actually affirmed this question because I've been thinking we're naive to be trusting these people. And so my answer to this question is, I think with a competitor, I tend to lean, and maybe this isn't the popular answer, even though I'm really trusting, I tend to think it's pretty naive to extend trust in a strategic way or in a competitive relationship.
So in your world, John, you do a lot of work with competitors, so whether it be a prosecutor or maybe a judge, or whatever the case is. How do you process this question? Because you would assume, like from watching TV, that it's always butting heads with those people. But is that the case? How does that look in the world of law?
So I think, at least in the legal realm, in the criminal world, you start from a place of almost no trust. And I think it can be strategic to build trust, not entirely, but within specific areas. So, opposing counsels know there's certain things that I could never do. So I can't break my client's confidentiality. There's certain things that, I can't weigh into, but there are things I can. And so, you can develop trust kind of within your lane, which can be very helpful. And it's,
But when you think of that, like when you think of prosecutors, so you're battling against them. But in our conversations, you've also had times where you have to go and essentially negotiate them or build trust with them so that you can get to a solution in a case. And I don't think people realize that.
Yeah.
How much work you do with prosecutors,
Yeah, all day long. I mean, it's the starting point. Every prosecutor looks at a case with a completely different mindset than you look at it. So you look at it on behalf of your client, where you have this person who's coming to you because, they think their world's over. Half the time you talk to your clients, they're in tears. They're going to lose their job. They're going to lose their house. They're going to go to jail, everything. And the prosecutor's perspective is, well, I have this expert police officer who's done 1,000 of these. I trust him completely. I don't trust you. You're a slimy defense attorney. And so if you could be strategic in some ways, building trust, to get the prosecutor to see your client for who he is, which, in the criminal world, most of the time they did something, but maybe they didn't do everything, and maybe, it's something that's fixable and curable and whatever the issue is. I mean, criminal stuff isn't always fun, but if, one of the most common things I deal with is DUIs. Most of the people are good dudes. They just, if they can control alcohol, then that's the problem. And so sometimes you can build trust within the realm and say, hey, here's the underlying issue. He's got something going on in his life. He's able to clear that. He's addressing the alcohol. I don't see that this past trauma is going to come back. And then once you get to that point where that there's no longer going to be that same issue again in the future, I think you can get the prosecutor to also see it for what it is and then, meet you halfway on a resolution.
So when you think about building trust, like with your clients as well, because your clients come to you and how, I don't know if I can ask this or not, but how often do they lie, right? Or how,
Oh, yeah, all the time.
and how do you handle that? Because it's not a competitor situation, but just from a strategic standpoint, how do you handle that when you're going to court and it's not entirely clear that what they're saying is true?
Yeah, I mean, you flush it out the best you can. I talk to them, especially at our first consultation, talk to me like I'm the doctor. I need to know what hurts, so if you tell me everything, I can fix it the best I can. If you only tell me what half the pain is, then it's, I only have half the story. And so it hurts my clients when I don't know everything. So if I don't know that, they just had a criminal case 6 months ago and it's the same thing happening again, I might talk to the prosecutor in a manner that, that could set them up poorly, versus if I know all their history, if I know what all the issues are, I can help better find what the cure is for the situation. If I, correctly diagnose that, which, half the battle is beating the case on its merits. Half of it is dealing with the underlying issue.
Yeah.
And you try to control as much as you can. And so you want to fight every case on all fronts. And so kind of go back to your original question, what if clients lie to you? Well, it just hurts them.
Yeah.
Because you can't fix the problem. And then you go to the prosecutor with, half fix. He's going to look at you sideways and say, I don't think you're reading this right. And then you're going to get a worse resolution. He's going to close the door for options. So it's critical that your clients trust you and talk to you and tell you, because sometimes you only get one shot.
You could really mess it up.
Yeah. You can get things. I mean, once you've blown your ethos, blown your trust, takes an extra 5 steps to get back. So,
John, it's interesting listening to you because I think when I think about this question, Scott, that you asked, I think it's interesting because what you're describing is a real intentionality around a specific moment. You're gonna build trust with this prosecuting attorney. You've got a strategy. Here's the information I need to share. Here's the story I need to tell. Here's what I need to do to get this person to kind of trust me, for me to trust them, and for us to move forward. I think that's kind of a different answer. Maybe what I'm doing right now, I'm changing my answer from before because John just convinced me. He's a good attorney.
He's a good attorney.
He just convinced me. But I think that's what I'm hearing you say. I think that if you're going to be strategic with a competitor or somebody who's an opposing counsel, opposing entity, whatever it is, there is this need. If you're going to build trust, there's an intentionality of we're going to walk into this, and there's some specific things that I need to share, some specific things that I can't share in order to get where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, with the competitive side, we talked about this last episode where the idea of zero sum versus cooperation. And zero sum is there's a winner and a loser. And what they would use, people would use the zero sum formulas for is when you have competitive situations or where there is a winning losing situation, because cooperation is not always appropriate, right?
Right.
You know, if you can imagine. On the football field or in the basketball court, or two rivals playing each other, Alabama and Auburn playing football, they're not going to stop in the middle and go, Auburn's not going to stop in the middle and go, hey, Alabama, let's I think you can do better on that play. Let's stop and let you rerun that play. I mean, that's not going to happen. Now, that's a game, but what they used it for was modeling nuclear war. And they used zero sum modeling nuclear war to say, and what it was a model of trust, not trust like I can trust you to do what's in my best interest, but I can trust that you will do what's in your best interest.
So that's called predictive trust. It's different than vulnerability-based trust.
Yeah.
It's predictive trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you well enough to know what your behavior is going to be. And so therefore, I can conclude that this will be your next step.
Yeah. And that's where people will say sometimes even incorrectly that inconsistency is an important part of building trust. But if someone's consistently in it for themselves, then that also is something that we can adjust to. And then it becomes a zero sum, which is probably what you run into a lot, where you're assuming that they're going to do the best they can to get the best result for themselves, not for you. And you accept that fact. And so there is a type of trust that's there, I would assume.
Oh, absolutely.
And then how do you handle it Because I'm imagining that, it's like it's like the sheepdog and the wolf in Looney Tunes. It's like they battle, and then they clock off and they go,
Right.
and then there's a different relationship.
Right.
Do you find that after competitive situations, you can step out of that and have a good relationship with someone who you maybe either bested or lost to?
Absolutely. No matter what the result is after a case, and I could hate the other side, I always extend like a thank you or something to the other side afterwards. Um, I try to make nothing, it's never personal. I try to be non-emotional about it. The other side's tried to win. We're trying to win. We're fighting for the best interests of our clients just as they are. Um, but what I try to do is I try to, anything that doesn't affect my clients, if I can smile and nod at someone in the halls, I might hate the guy's guts, but if I can get him to like me a little bit, maybe I can get a concession, something that actually matters to me, it matters to my client. So, um, yeah, what was the original question?
The original question
Went
is
off on a
that,
tangent there.
is it naive or strategic to build trust with a competitor? I was,
Yeah.
as you were just talking, I was thinking about, the world we live in. Imagine a world where there was no Microsoft or there was no Apple. There was just one of them. Where would we be?
Yeah.
I think there's a sense that like competition is good,
Yeah.
but there is this tendency for us to think of like scorched earth. I'm going to go in and I'm going to win everything and it's all going to be, and the reality is that might even be good for me. I might not even be my best version of myself. My company might not be the best version of itself if I own the market. There's
Yeah.
something to be said for, I'm going to respect and trust
Yeah.
a competitor to be in there because it might actually improve my business. It might actually make me better if they're there and I'm thinking about how we live in this ecosystem together.
Yeah, when you think about that, and I think they would even talk about that, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, the idea that they would have not been as good without the other one existing.
Yeah.
And I think so competition or competitiveness in and of itself is not necessarily a negative thing. In fact, it's a positive thing. And you see that even throughout nature, right? The competitiveness of strong surviving.
Yeah.
There's a competitiveness that happens that then drives to better outcomes. And when you think of, is it naive or strategic to build trust with a competitor? I think it's smart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it's smart. I think that you can't be naive to think that your competitor is out for your best interest.
Right.
And as long as you can accept that,
Yeah.
good to go.
Right.
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 You can, and again, trust their consistency in that, which is a matter of you understand that they're in it for themselves as you are for yours. And it doesn't mean that you can't respect or have ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay.
Yeah. Second question.
Second
Okay,
question.
so
Okay. Hard question. Here we go.
So what is the difference between trust and leverage in partnerships? Trust and leverage. You have trust, you have leverage. What's the difference? How do you define the
Yeah.
difference between those two things in a partnership?
Yeah. So we define trust as being there for a person in the ways that matter most to them. So we define it in a cooperative fashion because we're thinking about trust in the context of teams and businesses,
Yep.
things like that, to where we are assuming that people are coming with an intent to cooperate. So let's just start with that.
Yep.
But what this is suggesting is, can people trust to the point of leveraging someone else? And I would say that the line that is drawn between whether it's trust or leverage is when someone overdoes self-interest. And so when I only take action that is in my best interest and I start to leverage you for my benefit to a too large of a degree, that's when it starts to turn into what we call breakers, basically behaviors that erode trust.
Huh.
And so a behavior of, we're all self-interested. We should all acknowledge the fact that we have our own self-interests. Otherwise, we'd all wear the same clothes and drive the same car. And we have certain preferences, and that's
Right.
great, and certain interests, and that's great. And we've
Right.
got to be honest about that. Trust is not completely other-centered. But what it does is that if it's too, on either end, if it's too other-centered, then you're not accounting for yourself in that relationship. But if it's too me-centered, there's this guy that wrote a book called The Trusted Advisors, Charles Green, and there's a couple other authors there, but they have an equation that is a really nice equation. And what they say is self-interest or self-orientation. If your self-interest and self-orientation is too high, then all of a sudden your behaviors are going to be only for your benefit. And people will sniff that out
Yeah.
pretty darn quick. Like, this person's only
Yeah.
for themselves. And when I think of, like, in a law situation, this has got to be because back to the idea of in law, you are there for your client's best interest.
Yeah.
How do you process this? How do you see your clients process this?
Well, I'm thinking of a couple examples.
And he's changed the names to protect the innocent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they, every jurisdiction, every court system, there's always some differences. I had a relationship with a prosecutor that was so good that we both knew how cases were analyzed. We both knew what the other side was going to do, and I could get the best deal just like that. And I over leveraged our relationship to the point where I got a deal nobody should have gotten. And the judge did not like it one bit. And it, obviously it was good for that person. It was good for my practice, and that's great. But
Yeah.
and I always have to do what's best for my clients. But it sort of shut down the pipeline of good deals. So that was, for the practice and long term, that wasn't a smart business move. I've got to do everything I can for my clients. But as far as dealing with competition, we had built such a good rapport, and we're still friends today. He's doing something else now, but
That's because he lost to you really bad.
well,
You crushed
probably.
you crushed his life, John.
Yeah, maybe I leveraged it too far, but no, that was something that it was almost like a third party came in. He wasn't offended by it, but there were other attorneys in the room, and it didn't pass the smell test, and the judge was pissed. And so that was one that went too far.
But that wasn't what's interesting in that situation. That was you weren't trying, that in retrospect, you could look
Yeah.
back and go, wow, that probably you might have done it differently. But at the time,
Yeah.
how do you sort through that? Because if the person in that situation, let's just use our example of being too other centered, that prosecutor might have been a little bit too other centered, and then
Probably.
it created a scenario that was
Yeah.
a little awkward.
Yeah. Well, really, it's his job to say no, and we were just getting to the point where he's saying yes to everything. And so I took it too far. I still don't think I did, but it basically, looking back on it, I probably took advantage of the trust we had built. And I'm not saying I do it differently, but I think we all learn from that situation, going forward, or afterwards. I think we talked about it since. We're like, we got a little chummy there, and, you still have your job, and of course I was, private sector attorney. I'm doing everything I can. He just, he had a contract with the public, and, I'm not saying that he acted just purely, to meet the bare minimums, but, he probably mailed it in a little bit. But that was one circumstance where, looking back, things, trust was leveraged in that situation. So
And it's tough because you wouldn't necessarily know that is going to cause a breakdown
Yeah.
of some sort. But yet, in retrospect, it did cause a breakdown.
yeah.
Right?
Well, the reverse can happen. I've seen it happen to, it's probably happened to me. It's probably happened to other attorneys where they say, well, I know how much this guy's going to fight, and I know I can push him this hard and then he's going to break. And so certainly that happens in law all the time where, one of the strategies, if you don't have the facts on your side, you push the other side until they break. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
It's interesting. One of the things I think I should mention that, we don't answer these questions in advance. So anyone listening or watching,
No, we don't get them in.
We don't get.
We don't sit around and decide our answers.
No,
at all.
which also means I think we have epiphanies while we're sitting here. One of my epiphanies as I'm thinking about the question that I asked is this idea that trust, it's almost like leverage. Trust becomes leverage when it goes from trust being the conduit within we're operating to being the tool that we're using to get our way, right? So I think,
Which is a difference, right?
right. So I'm operating in trust with you, but there's a long-term view here. I'm not doing this because there's a short-term outcome. As soon as trust gets leveraged, we're using the word, to get an outcome that's very short-term, that's when it crosses the line, right?
Yeah.
Is it okay if I use it for both?
Well, what's interesting?
If you're my attorney, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I do look in both short and long term.
Sure, absolutely. But what's interesting about this is back to that research I mentioned in last episode around the strategies for these interactive games. One of the strategies that would perpetually lose is people that would cooperate, and then take advantage. And then go back to cooperation, and then take advantage. And so they would set a track record of cooperation, but it was a smokescreen.
Yep.
And then they would take advantage to get a big win, and then they would go back to cooperation.
Exactly. And that's my point. Okay.
And what would happen is in real life, where we have not just, not a single shot interaction, but many interactions, people sniff that stuff out, right? They sniff it out, and then we get labeled as a person who takes advantage.
Right.
You know what? Watch out for that guy, because when you look in the other way, he's going to take advantage of you. You were telling me about a situation where a competitor took advantage of you,
Right.
right? And that's that kind of situation you just mentioned. But this idea that if we're doing that, what happens is we start to exhibit breaking behavior, what we call breakers, and breaking behavior, where it stops being about trust and it starts being about using trust. And I think that's a great line.
That's when it becomes leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you would look at our list of breakers, and being self-centered is one. And that's one, if a person is too self-centered too much of the time, they start to use trust to manipulate, and that becomes toxic.
Yeah.
As a toxic relationship where there's manipulation back and forth.
Yep.
And we're using trust as a tool rather than just actually building it and wanting to have it be genuine. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good questions.
Yeah, these are good questions.
Yeah,
These are tough. These are tough questions.
We throw these out, and I said we don't answer them ahead of time. We also hope that when you listen to these and you're driving in your car, you're sitting at your desk or whatever, and what we hope is that you think about this in your context. So you might be in a sales environment, you might be in the legal realm, you might be in higher education, but just to challenge you to think about trust. Think about, are you leveraging it or are you just living in it? Which one is it? These are the kinds of things we want to challenge you with, and we just want to thank all of you for joining us and being a part of this with us today.
Boom.